when was the last time that you heard Nigel Farage say anything positive about Britain's future? He can't. He doesn't like Britain, doesn't believe in Britain, wants you to doubt it just as much as he does.
Keir Starmer ups the ante in his rhetorical battle with Nigel Farage in his speech here to Labour Party conference in Liverpool. Why is he saying this? And what else did he say? We will discuss in this latest episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool.
Hello, it's Alex, also at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool.
And Chris in Liverpool as well.
So behind us there is an event. I'm not sure what cause it is for, but there is corks popping. So they're obviously having something fizzy. Chris, will there be corks popping in Labour HQ tonight after Keir Starmer's conference speech?
You're good at this, aren't you? This is not your first rodeo. I think they'll be pleased that they have sharpened their argument on the biggest of kind of political stages around the whole question of reform. So, look, there's some people, I've spent the last couple of days just like drinking gallons of tea, speaking to all sorts of folk in the Labour Party from the cabinet down. There are some, by the way, who worry the party's talking too much about reform, who say, hang on a minute, what about the party losing votes to its left, to the Liberal Democrats, to the Greens, to others? And do you run the risk of raising reform's profile by talking about them the whole time when they're a party with not very many MPs and the next election is a million miles away? That was another cork going off, wasn't it? But I'd say most people I speak to at all levels of the party recognise that you've just got to take on reform. They're doing so well in the opinion polls, they're winning elections, they're dominating the political conversation. So you've got to lean into that. And I think what we got from Keir Starmer today was his answer to what loads of folk privately within the party have been telling him, which is that the party needs to be punchier, it needs to cower less and be more confident, it needs to paint more in primary colours, it needs to be willing to be politically quite aggressive because they're up against someone who is all of those things in how he prosecutes his argument, Nigel Farage. And I think this was Keir Starmer's attempt to do that.
I was just going to add on that. What is a really important point about this is I think it was actually a change in strategy that we've seen in this conference about the approach to Reform UK. There has been a criticism from some in the party. They've been ignoring the Labour left and they've been sort of aping or mimicking some of the language or approach of Reform UK. This conference has been about drawing a very clear line between that. So this calling out from a Labour perspective of Reform UK's policies, I actually think it's designed to appeal to the Labour left as well, to take the fight to Reform UK, not to be seen to be following in Reform UK's footsteps. I think that's where we've seen the sort of difference.
And I think they also hope that by sharpening the dividing line between Labour and Reform, whatever people's views of Keir Starmer, and there's some pretty punchy ones, that they can unite around a common opponent. And particularly, someone said to me today, someone very senior said to me today, look, there's nothing the left likes to wrestle with about it than something they regard as a grave injustice, and racism being one of those things. And if they can make an argument that galvanises the party around that, then that can hang them together, potentially, as Keir Starmer said, appeal to people who are not natural Labour supporters but would be repelled by the idea of Nigel Farage as Prime Minister. And I think that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and I just think the Labour movement, the heart of the Labour movement, the left ventricle is fighting against injustice, the right ventricle is fighting against racism. Hence why in Keir Starmer's speech today, the most rapturous applause was, first of all, for him recognising a Palestinian state, and that was in the wake of the Gaza peace plan from the White House, which we'll talk about in a second. And then the other big rousing round of applause was for when he said, we will fight Nigel Farage's racist policies with everything we've got. That's appealing to the whole Labour heart there.
Yeah.
Alex, though, this word racism and racist is now being used a lot. I mean, I remember a period of about 2 weeks ago when actually it was just one of the words you just wouldn't really use or you wouldn't hear in political discourse because it was such a serious accusation to make of somebody that they were proposing something that was racist. But now just in the last 48 hours, it's tumbling off everyone's lips constantly here.
Yeah, and it really has only been 48 hours because it was Keir Starmer who first used the word racist about a Reform UK policy on Sunday with Laura Ginsberg. And at that moment, that became the headline because it was notable and extraordinary that he had used a serious accusation, but also a heavy, very serious turn. Now it has been repeated again and again by cabinet ministers on the air. I mean, they are trying to be very, very careful in drawing a distinction between calling the policy of Reform UK racist from their perspective, and that specific policy about abolishing indefinite leave to remain, the right of some migrants to settle in the UK permanently. They are saying that is a racist policy from a Labour perspective, but they are also being very clear to say they're not saying that that means that Reform UK supporters are racist, and they're trying to say we understand the concerns of Reform UK supporters about immigration. It's quite a nuanced argument, and the risk and the jeopardy for the party is that the nuance just gets lost, and the more they use that term, even if they're trying to draw that careful distinction, the more people just might hear it, that actually it's being sort of sprayed around. And the very people that they're trying to kind of win back or appeal to, those Reform UK people that are looking towards Reform UK, it could end up alienating them. There's the jeopardy around the use of such a strong term like that, despite the fact it's provided a huge rallying point here at the Labour conference. It's
just one of those words, isn't it, in political conversation, that you could have an entire A4 page with however many words on it, and that one word is just bigger than almost anything else. And Alex, into the mix of this has stepped the Deputy Prime Minister, David Lammy.
Yeah, and I think this is quite symptomatic of the issue that the party could have around this use of language. So David Lammy was on Politics Live, BBC programme with Vicky Young, reacting to Keir Starmer's speech, and he said in one of his responses that he sort of signalled that Nigel Farage had flirted with Hitler Youth. Now,
in his youth.
Yes, to be clear, in his youth. Now, Reform UK completely denied that and said it was beneath contempt, that it was libellous. David Lammy then came on BBC News Channel, and I said to him, Reform UK have said this is contemptuous, this kind of language, it's, libellous. And David Lammy then clarified his remarks and said, actually, I accept that Reform UK have denied this, and I want to play the ball, not the man. So it was quite a sort of swift turnaround from that. I think that just is kind of symptomatic of where there is a bit of a risk here.
And clarified its political speak for saying the opposite of what you said a couple of hours previously.
Well, newscasters can hear for themselves how this entire story arc played out, because here is David Lammy version 1 at lunchtime on BBC 2.
So yes or no, is Nigel Farage a racist?
I answered your question. I'm not going to play the man. I'm playing the ball as our leader did. I will leave it for the public to come to their own judgments about someone who once flirted with Hitler Youth when he was younger. That is for the public, but we will be absolutely clear about the policy choice before the British people in the years ahead as we head to the general election.
And then here is David Lammy version 2 with Alex a couple of hours later.
I think there were some articles circling around from a teacher, but I wasn't at school with Nigel Farage. I don't know what songs he sang at school, so I'm happy.
Have no evidence for that suggestion.
I'm happy to clarify. I did say it's for the public to make up their mind, and I did also emphasise that let us play the ball, not the man. So it's not my intention to play the man, Nigel Farage. In fact, I did a show with Nigel Farage on LBC a few years ago. Let us concentrate on the ball, the policy which is the deportation policy, his policies on the NHS, which I think is to charge, and his policies on lowering tax cuts, which would lead to the bond markets, not the man.
To be totally clear, you're pulling back from that comment that you made.
He has denied it. And so I accept that he has denied it, and I would like to clarify that position, because in the end, the Prime Minister was keen for us to focus on the policies, not the individual.
Let's talk about one.
So an example there of like when you up the ante on whether things are racist or not, that sometimes people can get maybe a bit carried away. Also talking about upping the ante, okay, Starmer upped the ante when it came to Nigel Farage, then instantly Nigel Farage upped the ante again on Starmer with his own response.
Yeah, and this is a sort of nerdy observation, but it's sort of worthwhile as an example of how Reform are willing to tear up kind of long-standing kind of conventions really around conference season, because what's tended to happen in the past is each party will have its conference and pretty much accept that they are the few days in the sun for that party, and the other parties sort of just don't do very much in public, and they don't get much coverage for it, as opposed to your normal political storytelling where you hear clips from all the different parties on any given day, depending on what is in the news. Today, minutes really after the Prime Minister had finished, Nigel Farage is doing a news conference, and so inviting questioning around what he makes of what the Prime Minister has said. Now, I guess, in Mr Farage's defence, there's been this very pointed accusation that's been put to him, perhaps more so than tends to happen in party conference political knockabout. But him saying that he believes the use of that word, and I think this predated his awareness of what David Lammy went on to say, that the Prime Minister's accusation that policy around indefinite leave to remain amounted to racism was something that imperilled the safety of his own team, his own party staff. And that angered him sufficiently that it doubled down his determination to do well in those elections coming up next May, etc., etc. And so even, within the politics of the last few days, the extent to which that word, because it's so big and it's such a big thing to accuse others of, can end up being this sort of lightning rod around which a conversation then rumbles, and also where anger sets in. So I was really struck that, Nigel Farage made the point of saying that he had reckoned that despite their different worldview, Keir Starmer was decent.
Yeah.
And
they could have a chat.
And they could have a chat. And actually, a couple of months ago, Keir Starmer in the House of Commons walked across the floor and walked up the steps and shook Nigel Farage by the hand, and they had a bit of a chat. And both sides briefed afterwards. Look, they're human beings. They can have a chat.
David Lammy made the point he used to do a show with Nigel Farage. So, it's that sort of thing. But when I think this all speaks to exactly what the conversation we're having, which is when you start to make those very serious accusations and use those tones, it ups the ante across the board. And while here, I think that has proven to be really popular with people that wanted the Labour Party to take a much stronger stance on this and to be punchier, I think the risk that comes with that is that the ante gets upped and the conversation goes places that you might not have thought that it would initially, or even hoped it would.
Just out the corner of my eye, I can see that some screens that have got our news coverage on it on television, and your piece, Chris, on the 6 o'clock news. Labour HQ will be really happy with how it looks because it's a sea of flags, Union Jacks, England flags, Scotland flags, Wales flags, and that sends a very strong visual message about patriotism. I mean, some people might think they tuned to the last night of the proms by accident.
yeah, but
that would have loads of EU flags.
But then that again is part of this imagery that they're attempting to project about how they define patriotism, and also how they believe the flag can be proudly flown, but where they then draw a line, a legitimacy line, if you like, between what they see as a laudable use of the flag and what they would see as a divisive and exclusionary use of flags. But again, it's an example of how reform have completely shaken the kind of snow globe of politics. That wouldn't have happened a couple of years ago, not because there aren't Labour folk who are patriotic or comfortable or uncomfortable with flags. There'll be the full range of views around flags, no doubt, but that a political decision was taken that they were going to hand out flags, and the flags of the different nations of the UK as well as the Union flag, to make a point alongside that picture from Shropshire, alongside that riff about the about different landscapes in the UK and different sporting teams in the UK, that is their definition of being patriotic, and then also trying to lean into a sense of pride. And I know they've kicked this around privately. How do you simultaneously sound positive about who we are and our country and our collection of nations without sounding like you're saying to people who are struggling everything is great? And that is a difficult line to tread, and I think we saw an attempt by the Prime Minister to do that today.
Well, except it ended up being, garbled isn't maybe the right word, but he did this whole theme about Britain's not broken, and then there's this quite neat rhetorical device he had of picking out people in the audience who'd done great things for their communities, like setting up a girls' football club in their school, or rebuilding a library. And he said Britain isn't broken. But then the whole thrust of the speech was Britain's in need of renewal. So it's either okay or it needs renewed. Which one is it? I haven't quite worked out how those two things can be true at the same time.
And I think this is something that Labour's actually struggled with for much more than just this conference. Keir Starmer had to acknowledge that the early days when he made that kind of doom and gloom speech, that perhaps that wasn't the right approach, because there is a really careful line between recognising what's going on in people's day-to-day lives and trying to reflect that, and not making it feel like it's all blim and hopeless, and saying actually we have got some of the solutions to it. And the danger is it just does become a bit confused. And, I don't know, did he strike the right balance today? I've spoken to some people that suggest that it was actually really good to hear a bit of optimism, and they've been looking for some of that and some of that kind of vision. And this is a party that after, as we've talked about loads and loads, a difficult few weeks and months, that they needed a sense of that optimism from Keir Starmer. But, with the backdrop of the budget and then everything we've heard about the realities of the choices that are going to come down the line, it's whether or not it's that thing, like I said last time we had this conversation, how much are you speaking to the conference, how much are you speaking to the country, and are the two always compatible?
Is there a parallel universe where Keir Starmer could have been a little bit more candid about how unpopular he is personally? Because he didn't really nod to that at all.
He didn't really. And look, some of the personal polling for him by historical standards, contemporary historical standards for prime ministers. And we've had quite a few recent prime ministers who've not been wildly popular, which has contributed to the number of prime ministers we've had recently. His figures are dire. I mean, that's just, he knows that. He didn't directly address it, but it is the thing that lingers around this whole conference. I've been actually surprised at the breadth and depth and the seniority of figures. By the way, including those who are desperate to see him succeed, who don't want the job themselves. There are others, frankly, who are on manoeuvres who
They're
would
not trying to
quite like
knife
the
him.
job. There are some who would love the job themselves. There are others who want him to succeed, who are desperate to beat Nigel Farage, but do worry about whether he's the front man, whether he's the best front man
But I mean,
for the job.
what else could he have done? Because when you're prime minister, and it is about authority, and it is about convincing people that they should stick with you and have faith, which is the words that we heard the Chancellor use, and that you're trying to rally the troops. You can't really go, oh guys, I know not many folk like me, but I'm going to sort it out. I think that's the
And particularly now, where that you'd be creating a meme, wouldn't you? Sort of instantly.
Totally.
It's where 5 seconds is lifted out of perhaps a nuanced paragraph.
It's that strange thing about politics that you want to at times be sort of humble or modest, but can a leader show an awful amount of weakness without that coming back to bite them?
And also, he is in a stronger position now than he was a few days ago, because Andy Burnham has been vanquished. Now, some people would argue Andy Burnham vanquished himself rather than by any kind of nimble manoeuvring by Keir Starmer, but actually his leadership is a bit stronger tonight.
Yeah, I mean, Andy Burnham has been left in a situation, I think, where plenty, as we've discussed already on Newscast, who, even those who are supporters of him, feel that he sort of overplayed his hand. But as we've said, Andy Burnham, and the reason that story became as big as it was principally because of the situation that the government finds itself in. It's symptomatic of that wider kind of question that's going on. And there are others who don't have the issue of trying to find a seat and get to Westminster in advance of any leadership campaign, who are already in senior positions and are conducting themselves rather more discreetly.
But what's interesting is I did speak to one person today who suggested that strangely the conference has come at quite a good time given all of the stuff that was going on around Andy Burnham, because they're all here, they've sort of thrashed it out and it's been talked about, and everybody's had to be in front of a camera, a microphone or on a conference stage addressing this issue and sort of either publicly saying, yeah, I'm with Keir Starmer, or as Wes Streeting said to me today, he's 100% going to lead us into the next election. And, if we'd been in Westminster, or if Westminster hadn't been sitting, all those sort of questions would have kind of drip potentially have continued. So there is a view that in a strange way, the whole of the Labour movement being camped in this place and having those discussions kind of publicly about it all is a way to maybe take a bit out the sting out of it for now. But I think Chris is completely right that those concerns about Keir Starmer's longer term position are really vocalised around.
Now, this speech was quite policy light, to use a terrible jargon term. There was kind of only really two kind of classic announcements, wasn't there? One was abandoning the Tony Blair era target of 50% of young people going to university. Well, there's now a slightly more complicated target, which is 2/3 of young people either going to university or doing the kind of gold standard level of apprenticeship. And then the other one was about the launch of a new NHS trust, which is going to be entirely digital, which, as Keir Starmer explained, means you will be able to get access to some of the best specialists eventually from, your living room or wherever you happen to be on your phone speaking to them from.
Yeah, both of these things in England. The clear implication around the education idea is that some people were perhaps encouraged to go to university where a better path for them would have been an apprenticeship. But the core message he's got is that he wants, and this phrase has been used in different contexts, but a parity of esteem between apprenticeships and universities. On the NHS stuff, this is about this kind of gateway on your phone, so you can talk to a specialist if it's suitable to do it remotely rather than in person, using existing staff. So now they think they can do it more efficiently because they are not having to move from room to room, and the patients aren't having to get on a bus for ages to go to the hospital, etc., etc. But and they think that'll be a better service. They reckon they can do it by 2027, which is quite
rapid
for some specialisms, not everything.
Yeah.
And also there's a little line on the NHS England website where there's a bit more detail about this, where it's obviously aimed at people who work in the NHS, saying, don't worry, we will negotiate this with your unions and your professional bodies before we actually introduce it. So it's maybe easier said than done. Also, the world outside this conference hall continues to turn, and there was huge news the night before when Donald Trump and the Israeli Prime Minister unveiled the latest American plan for Gaza, which has got either 20 points or 21 points. And I'm skeptical of any plan that has more than 6 points, because it's quite hard to remember more than 6 things. But this is the idea that Hamas would release all the existing hostages within a 72-hour window. Israel would then release more Palestinian prisoners. Then the IDF would gradually demobilize from various bits of Gaza. Then you'd have some international military force providing stability. You'd then work on a Palestinian-led administration. But in the meantime, there would be oversight of that by some governing body, which would include Donald Trump and Tony Blair. And this is how the Prime Minister reacted to that in his speech today.
And conference, I welcome the new US initiative to bring peace to the Middle East. I strongly support efforts to end the fighting, release every hostage, and urgently scale up aid into Gaza. All sides must now come together to bring this initiative into reality, because we must restart the hope of a two-state solution, a safe and secure Israel, alongside the long-promised Palestinian state, a state that this country now recognises.
And then a little bit after that, Alex, you were talking to Yvette Cooper, the still very new Foreign Secretary. What was her take on what feels like quite a big step forward, but then you realise actually isn't a step anywhere yet because Hamas haven't agreed to any of it?
No, exactly. And I think there was a recognition from Yvette Cooper. Well, she said this is really complicated, but she also did say that from her perspective, she said we need Hamas to accept this now, to get the ceasefire, to get the hostages released, and of course to get the aid into Gaza was her argument. She described it as an incredibly important moment, and I think that is the sense that yes, it is, because potentially it is. You know, there's quite clearly quite a long way to go, and a lot will depend on what Hamas says here, and then potentially the response of the Israelis to whatever Hamas says in response to this plan from Donald Trump. But I think while Donald Trump is clearly talking this up quite a lot with a bit of a sense of optimism, I think there is that kind of natural caution, because of course it is complicated and there are several steps to go to before the situation on the ground in Gaza starts to change.
And in terms of other things happening, there seems to be some leaks tonight of a possible resolution to the two-child benefit cap. Bloomberg and The Guardian reporting that actually in the budget, Rachel Reeves is going to lift the cap, but not entirely. Where do you think we are with that? Officially, we're nowhere.
Officially, we're nowhere. And again, I've put this to many, many ministers on the airwaves, and they all give the answer that you would absolutely expect them to give, which is that we'll basically wait and see until the budget. You know, there's this child poverty task force, which is looking at this and a load of other stuff. Wait for the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility forecast, which is going to dictate much of what Rachel Reeves
First one comes on Friday.
Basically what she can and can't afford to do. But having said all that, everybody that you speak to also gives these very clear signals and indications that they think that this cap does need to be lifted in some capacity. But it will be interesting as to whether they sort of just fully lift this cap or do something slightly more complex. And of course, with the mood in the party and after the rows that there were over winter fuel, over welfare more broadly, I think the government needs to tread really carefully if they don't do anything other than something which is a really quite bold move in this area, given all the signals we've heard, which kind of leaning very, very firmly in the direction that there's going to be movement on this.
Totally. The wind is blowing definitely in one direction. You had people like John McDonnell, the former Shadow Chancellor, being readmitted to the Parliamentary Labour Party. He'd had the whip removed, to use the Westminster language, around all of this. Clearly it's on its way. They'd cause themselves no end of grief, given how far up the hill they've marched with this, if they then didn't do it. They're now working out how they do it, and does it taper? How far does it extend? If and then there's a trade-off with how much money it then costs you. So that's where we are with it.
Can I end on a little philosophical note? And it's back to your point, Chris, that you made about Nigel Farage doing his response to Starmer's speech minutes afterwards, and he did it from a sort of like fake Downing Street sort of setup from his own office with a podium and flags. And you were saying how that's kind of just not the traditional way of doing things. I just think we're in a world now where these events, these conferences, haven't actually changed since the first one I came to about 18 years ago. I just wonder, when is the future going to arrive at all? I mean, it's a privilege to be here and be able to consume politics 24/7 with like the cabinet standing there and all the backbenchers there. But I do just wonder, like, when this is going to get into the modern era.
So I'm certainly not seeking to defend the sort of why is it not like it used to be. And obviously Nigel Farage can choose to do what he wants. wants, and he's spent a sort of political lifetime breaking kind of conventions. I just mention it because it is unconventional.
Oh, yeah, no, but I just wonder when this sort of setup is going to move. Well,
I mean, I suppose what I'd say, and there's two elements, isn't there? Alex was saying this earlier. There's two elements to an event like this. There's obviously the outward stuff, which is hugely important for a party in terms of its shop window to the country. But don't underestimate the what's going on around here. This exhibition hall where all of the kind of lobbyists from different outfits, unions, commercial enterprises, etc., pressing the flesh, and then in the bars and the restaurants, and 24 hours a day during these conferences pretty much, people meeting face to face. So I think in that sense, I mean, maybe I'm just a sad old, I've been coming to them for too long, but I would have thought whatever digital revolution, political change comes, a party getting together, people are very, for a lot of activists, they're here on holiday.
Oh, yeah, no, totally.
Time off work, and they're meeting.
This is their Glastonbury.
Yeah, political Glastonbury. They're meeting their friends, sometimes their heroes, and I don't say that in any sort of dismissive sense. It's a big part of their identity and who they are, and physically meeting to do that is a key part of it.
And it is interesting. So when I first got here yesterday, bumped into a Blairite veteran on the way down from the train station. And they were being quite pro-Andy Burnham. And they're like, well, do you see any members of the cabinet who gets people asking them for selfies? And I was like, I can see where you're coming from, Andy Burnham. Like, people do come up to him and ask for selfies. Then when Darren Jones finished doing his newscast interview here in this spot yesterday, loads of people came up and asked him for selfies. I was like, okay, that's that argument disproven.
To be fair,
somewhat.
Wes Streeting got loads of selfie requests when we were just about to go live on the channel. Yvette Cooper, I think somebody stopped and tried to get it. It does happen because
I suppose this isn't the
Labour
public.
Party, but within the Labour Party, these are the cabinet, the kind of big names, the people they've watched and listened to, and it's their chance to interact with them. I still think, I think you're right. They do sometimes feel a bit outdated, and that kind of big speech moment in the hall. I really do question how much that connects beyond the walls of this kind of strange place. But I would counter that by saying I still think it's a really important thing for the parties, and particularly when a party is wobbly or a leader's in a bit of peril, they are the moment that I think can make a difference to how the party feels about the people that are running it, and that's why I think they will sort of be important for some time.
But I think, to pick up on that, where they can feel odd, for anyone who gives it more than a moment's thought, and of course most people don't, and this only dawned on me when I missed a couple of years of conference season a few years back on shared parental leave, that when you're just an ordinary consumer of news, as I almost was then, you might catch the Prime Minister's speech or a sense that he's given one, but then Prime Ministers give speeches all the time. And so it has a bigger feel if you're in the bubble of it than it does out there. But then maybe that's okay, because it is principally certainly for those who are here, for the experience of being here and the conversations that they get to have, and then the party tries to make that wider argument to the country.
And also people come up to you and give you free sticks of rock.
Absolutely tremendous.
That you then start chewing before recording.
You both
podcasts.
have one. I haven't. I mean,
you can nibble on his.
I'm all right.
Stick of rock. Right, Chris, thank you very much.
Cheers.
Alex, thanks to you
pleasure
too.
as ever.
And that's it from me from the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, because I'm going to be back in the Newscast studio. These two are still going to be here for another day. Bye.